The dust-covered streets of Moab, Utah Territory, seemed to rise up and taunt Eleanor Reed as she sank to her knees outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, her once fine dress torn at the hem and her hands raw from days of traveling. The year was 1876, and like so many others who had ventured west following the Civil War, Eleanor had come seeking opportunity, only to find hardship waiting with open arms. "Please, sir," she called to a passing gentleman in a fine suit. "I can cook, clean, sew, anything you need. I just need work." The man hurried past without acknowledgement, as had a dozen others before him. Eleanor had arrived in Moab 3 days earlier with nothing but a small carpet bag containing her few remaining possessions and the locket around her neck, the last gift from her mother before consumption had claimed her life. Eleanor's father had followed shortly after, leaving her alone to face the creditors who took their Pennsylvania home. The scorching summer sun beat down on her fair skin as she watched patrons enter and exit the saloon. Most avoided her gaze, while others offered lewd suggestions that made her cheeks burn with shame and anger. Her stomach growled painfully, reminding her that the last of her meager funds had purchased a stale biscuit the previous morning. "I'll work for food," she called to another passerby. "I'm a hard worker, I swear it." Inside the Silver Dollar, Brennan Nash leaned against the bar, nursing a whiskey while half listening to the saloon owner, Jasper Miller, complain about unreliable staff. "Third girl to quit this month," Jasper grumbled, polishing a glass with more force than necessary. "Says she's off to Denver where the money's better. Damn near impossible to find reliable help these days." Brennan nodded absently, his attention caught by the commotion outside the swinging doors. He'd noticed the woman earlier hard not to, with her attempting to speak to every man who passed by. Unlike the painted ladies who occasionally worked the street corners of Moab, this one had a different sort of desperation about her. "What's the story with her?" Brennan asked, nodding toward the doors. Jasper squinted through the grimy windows. "Been out there since morning. Sheriff's already run her off twice, but she keeps coming back. Stubborn thing." Brennan drained his whiskey and set the glass down with a decisive click. At 32, he'd spent more than half his life on horseback, driving cattle across 3 territories, and building a reputation as one of the finest horsemen in the region. The last decade of hard work had finally paid off with the purchase of his own ranch just outside town, the Rocking Inn, but its success meant he could no longer manage it alone. "Maybe I'll see what she's about," he said, straightening his hat. "Careful, Nash," Jasper warned. "Town's full of hard luck stories these days. Most of them are more trouble than they're worth." Brennan stepped through the saloon's swinging doors and into the harsh sunlight. The woman didn't notice him at first, too busy attempting to gain the attention of a passing stagecoach driver who hurried by with his head down. When she finally turned, Brennan was struck by the fierce determination in her eyes, despite the obvious exhaustion etched across her features. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat, "understand you're looking for work." Eleanor scrambled to her feet, brushing dust from her skirts with dignity that belied her circumstances. "Yes, sir, I am." "What kind of work can you do?" His tone wasn't unkind, but it was direct, assessing. "Nearly anything you might need, sir. I can cook a proper meal, keep a house in order, mend clothing. I've managed accounts and correspondence. I'm a quick learner for tasks I haven't yet mastered." Her voice held no tremor despite her desperate state. "Can you ride?" The question caught her off guard. Yes, though it's been some time." "Handle livestock. I grew up with chickens and helped with the neighbors' horses." Brennan studied her carefully. Her hands were soft, clearly not accustomed to ranch work, but there was something in her straight-backed posture and direct gaze that spoke of resilience. I've got a ranch 5 miles west of town, looking for someone to help with the house and basic chores. It's hard work, long days. Pay is room and board plus $15 a month. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly at the sum. It wasn't a fortune by any means, but it was honest work and far more generous than she dared hope for after days of rejection. I accept your offer, Mr. Nash. Brennan Nash. Eleanor Reed. She extended her hand, which he shook firmly. When would you like me to start? Now, if you're able. I've got supplies to pick up in town, then we head back to the ranch before sundown. Eleanor clutched her small bag tighter. I'm ready. Brennan nodded toward the general store. Let's get you something to eat first. Can't have you fainting on the ride back. Inside Jenkins' general store, Eleanor tried not to appear too eager as Brennan purchased bread, cheese, and dried beef. He handed her a portion without ceremony, then continued gathering his supplies while she ate carefully, savoring each bite and fighting the urge to wolf down the first real food she'd had in days. Mrs. Jenkins, a plump woman with sharp eyes, watched the exchange with open curiosity. Finally hiring help out at the Rocking Inn, Mr. Nash. Ranch is growing. Can't manage it all alone anymore, he replied simply, paying for his purchases. Well, isn't that interesting, Mrs. Jenkins said, giving Eleanor an appraising look that made her uncomfortably aware of her disheveled appearance. You know, Mr. Nash, there are plenty of respectable women in town who might— I've found suitable help, thank you. Brennan cut her off, gathering his packages. Miss Reed has experience with housekeeping and animals, just what I need. Outside, he loaded his supplies onto a sturdy bay gelding before helping Eleanor mount a gentle-looking pinto. Ever ridden astride? He asked, noting her uncertainty. No, sir, always side saddle. Side saddle's no good for ranch work, you'll get used to it. His tone left no room for argument. It's a few hours' ride. We'll take it slow. As they left town, Eleanor felt the stares of townsfolk following them. She sat as straight as she could despite her exhaustion, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. Whatever lay ahead at the Rocking Inn, it had to be better than begging on the streets of Moab. The ride was longer than Eleanor anticipated, her inexperience on horseback making every mile a challenge. By the time the ranch buildings appeared on the horizon, she was gripping the saddle horn with white knuckles, her thighs burning from the unaccustomed position. The Rocking Inn was modest, but well-maintained, a main house built of sturdy logs with a covered porch, a large barn, corral, and several outbuildings scattered across the property. A creek wound through the western edge, and beyond that, rocky foothills rose toward the distant mountains. It's not much, Brennan said as they approached, but it's mine. Paid for it with 15 years of driving other men's cattle. It's beautiful, Eleanor replied honestly, taking in the peaceful setting as the setting sun painted the landscape in gold and crimson. Brennan helped her dismount, catching her briefly when her legs nearly buckled beneath her. You'll be sore tomorrow, he warned. I'll manage, she assured him, straightening with determination. He showed her to a small room off the kitchen, clearly intended as a pantry but hastily converted with a narrow bed, chest of drawers, and a hook on the wall for clothing. It's not much privacy, but it's the best I can offer. The main bedroom's upstairs. This is fine, Mr. Nash, thank you. Brennan, he corrected. No need for formalities out here. We'll be working together too closely for that. After showing her where to find everything in the kitchen, he left her to prepare a simple supper while he tended to the horses. Eleanor worked quickly, grateful to have a task to focus on. The kitchen was rudimentary but functional, and she managed to put together a meal of beans, bacon, and the bread they'd purchased in town. They ate in relative silence, both too tired for conversation. Afterward, Brennan outlined her duties: cooking, cleaning, mending, helping with garden work, and eventually assisting with the livestock once she'd learned the routines. "Questions?" he asked when he'd finished. "Just one," Eleanor said. "You mentioned being partners when you offered me the position. What did you mean by that?" Brennan looked surprised. "Did I? Meant you'd be a working partner, I suppose, not just a servant. Ranch this size needs people who care about its success." He paused. "That won't be a problem, will it?" "No," Eleanor replied. "I appreciate the clarification. I'll work hard to earn my keep, Mr. Brennan. See that you do." He stood, stretching his tall frame. "Sun's up at 5, so are we." When he'd gone upstairs, Eleanor sank onto her narrow bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. She'd gone from desperate and starving to employed with a roof over her head in the span of hours. The work would be hard, she knew, but for the first time since leaving Pennsylvania, she felt a fragile hope take root. She wasn't naive enough to believe her struggles were over. She'd heard stories of young women lured to remote locations by unscrupulous men, but something about Brennan Nash's straightforward manner reassured her. He'd been gruff but respectful, and there was an integrity in his weathered face that she instinctively trusted. As exhaustion claimed her, Eleanor's last thought was that perhaps, just perhaps, her luck had finally changed. The rooster's crow startled Eleanor awake well before dawn. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was, the small room unfamiliar in the darkness. Then the previous day's events came rushing back, along with the awareness of burning muscles from the long ride. She dressed quickly in the same travel-worn dress, promising herself she'd mend and wash it properly when time allowed. In the kitchen, she was surprised to find Brennan already awake, stoking the stove fire. "Thought I'd let you sleep a few extra minutes your first day," he said by way of greeting. "Coffee's on. Biscuits and bacon for breakfast if you don't mind cooking while I check the livestock." By the time he returned, Eleanor had breakfast ready and the table set. They ate quickly, Brennan outlining the day's work between bites. "I've got 20 head of cattle in the north pasture that need moving today. Horse trading's my main business, but I'm building a small herd. You'll stay here, get the house in order, see what supplies we need. There's a vegetable garden out back that needs tending." "I understand," Eleanor said, already mentally cataloging the tasks ahead. The house, while not filthy, showed clear signs of a bachelor's limited attention to domestic details. "I'll be back midday. If anyone comes by, which isn't likely, just tell them I'll return later." After he left, Eleanor threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction from her aching body. She scrubbed floors, beat rugs, organized the kitchen, and made a comprehensive list of household needs. The physical labor felt cleansing after days of uncertainty. In the garden, she discovered a surprisingly well-planned array of vegetables, many overrun with weeds but salvageable. By noon, she'd cleared nearly half the plot and harvested enough for a decent stew. When Brennan returned, dust-covered and hungry, he paused in the doorway, taking in the transformed kitchen. "Place hasn't looked this good since." He trailed off, then simply nodded his approval. "Smells good. Vegetable stew and the last of the bread," Eleanor explained. "The garden is quite impressive, though neglected. Started it 2 springs ago," he said, washing his hands in the basin. "Never seemed to find time to maintain it properly." They fell into an easy routine over the following days. Eleanor rose before dawn to prepare breakfast and pack Brennan's midday meal. While he worked with the horses and cattle, she transformed the house inch by inch, turning the rough cabin into a proper home. In the evenings, they would eat together, their conversation gradually extending beyond the day's tasks. Eleanor learned that Brennan had come west as a boy of 15, working his way up from camp cook to trail boss before saving enough to purchase the Rocking Inn 5 years earlier. He spoke little of his family, only mentioning in passing that his parents had died during a cholera outbreak in St. Louis when he was young. In turn, she shared carefully edited versions of her own past her childhood in Pennsylvania, her parents' deaths, the financial troubles that had sent her west. She omitted the more painful details. Her father's gambling debts that had cost them everything, the unwelcome advances from creditors that had hastened her departure. By the end of her first week, Eleanor had earned a grudging respect from Brennan when he discovered she could not only cook and clean, but also keep accurate accounts, a task he admitted to neglecting. "Where'd you learn bookkeeping?" he asked one evening as she organized his haphazard records at the kitchen table. "My father was a merchant," she explained. "He taught me from a young age, said it was important to understand numbers even if I never used the knowledge." Brennan studied her with new interest. "Seems there's more to you than meets the eye, Eleanor Reed." "Perhaps there's more to both of us," she replied with a small smile. The following Sunday, Brennan surprised her by announcing they would go into town for supplies and church if she wished to attend. "I would," she said, grateful for the opportunity to worship and equally thankful for the chance to purchase fabric for a new dress. Her salary remained untouched, waiting in Brennan's strongbox until they could visit the bank. The townspeople's curious glances were not lost on Eleanor as they entered the small church together. Mrs. Jenkins in particular seemed determined to catch every detail of their interaction, whispering behind her hand to her companion when Brennan unconsciously placed a hand at the small of Eleanor's back while navigating the crowded aisle. After the service, several ranchers' wives approached, introducing themselves with calculating smiles. "We're so pleased to finally meet Mr. Nash's housekeeper," said Mrs. Porter, a woman with sharp features and sharper eyes. "We'd heard he'd hired help, though the circumstances were unusual." "Very unusual," agreed Mrs. Thurston. "Found begging outside the saloon, wasn't it?" Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks but lifted her chin. "Mr. Nash offered me employment when I was seeking work. I'm grateful for the opportunity." "Of course, dear Mrs." Porter patted her arm condescendingly. "And how comfortable are your accommodations at the ranch? I do hope Mr. Nash has made proper arrangements." The implication was clear, and Eleanor felt a flash of anger. Before she could respond, Brennan appeared at her side, his expression stormy. "Ladies," he said coolly, "I see you're getting acquainted with Miss Reed." "Just expressing our concern for her well-being," Mrs. Thurston simpered. "A young woman alone at a bachelor's ranch, people do talk." "Then they should find better things to do with their time," Brennan replied flatly. "Eleanor, we should get our supplies before the store closes." As they walked toward the general store, Eleanor could feel the weight of stares following them. "They think I'm your—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. "What they think doesn't matter," Brennan said firmly. "We know the truth." In the store, Eleanor selected fabric, thread, and other necessities while Brennan arranged for larger supplies to be delivered to the ranch. When they reached the counter, the shopkeeper's wife gave Eleanor a cold look. "Will that be all, Mr. Nash?" she asked, pointedly ignoring Eleanor. "Miss Reed's purchases will go on my account as well," he said. "Of course," the woman replied with false sweetness. "We're also interested in your new arrangement. Such a generous employer you are." Eleanor felt Brennan tense beside her. To her surprise, he placed a deliberate hand over hers on the counter. "Miss Reed is a valued part of the Rocking Inn," he said clearly, his voice carrying through the small shop. "Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to take their business elsewhere." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Eleanor's thoughts tumbling over the day's events. She'd known there would be talk, but facing the town's judgment directly had been harder than anticipated. "I'm sorry if I've caused you difficulty," she finally said as the ranch came into view. Brennan gave her a sidelong glance. "You've got nothing to apologize for. Small towns run on gossip. They'll find something new to talk about soon enough." But the gossip didn't subside. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor became aware of its persistence through the strained interactions during their weekly trips to town and the occasional visitor to the ranch who would study her with thinly veiled curiosity. Despite this, life at the rocking inn fell into a comfortable rhythm. Eleanor's new dresses, practical but far more becoming than her worn traveling clothes, were finished. The vegetable garden flourished under her care, and the house had never been cleaner or more organized. By her 4th week, Brennan had begun teaching her to ride properly, their evening lessons becoming a highlight of her days. His patient instruction and the growing trust between them made these hours special in a way Eleanor hadn't anticipated. "You're a natural," he told her one evening as they rode along the creek that marked the ranch's western boundary. "Another week and you'll be ready to help with the cattle." "I'm not sure the cows will be as impressed with my abilities," Eleanor laughed, more relaxed on horseback than she'd ever imagined possible. "Don't sell yourself short. You've taken to ranch life better than most." The genuine approval in his voice warmed her, and she found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, noting the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, how his weathered hands were nonetheless gentle with animals, the rare but transformative nature of his smile. These observations troubled her. Developing feelings for her employer would complicate an already precarious position. Yet she couldn't deny the increasing awareness between them, the lingering glances, the brief touches that seemed to occur more frequently, the conversations that stretched into the evening hours. One afternoon in late summer, Brennan returned from town earlier than expected, his expression grim. Eleanor was kneading bread dough but stopped when she saw his face. "What's happened?" He tossed his hat onto the table with unusual force. "Seems the good people of Moab have decided you're my mistress, not my housekeeper. Judge Patterson had the nerve to ask if I'd be sharing your services with his son when he visits next month." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "Oh." "I nearly knocked him to the ground," Brennan continued, pacing the kitchen. "Then Reverend Clark took me aside to express his concern for your moral welfare and suggested you'd be better off working in town where you could be properly supervised." "Perhaps he's right," Eleanor said quietly. "If my presence is damaging your reputation, to hell with my reputation," Brennan interrupted. "It's yours I'm worried about. You deserve better than their ugly speculation." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and something shifted in the air between them. Eleanor became acutely aware of the flour dusting her hands, the loose strand of hair falling across her cheek, the sudden intensity in Brennan's gaze. "Why did you really hire me, Brennan?" she asked softly. "You could have found someone with more experience, someone who wouldn't cause such talk." He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant. "When I saw you outside that saloon, I recognized something in you. Pride, determination. You weren't broken, just bent by circumstances. I've been there. Knew what it was to need just one person to take a chance." He paused. "And maybe I was lonely. This place, it's everything I've worked for, but it's empty sometimes." The honesty in his confession touched her deeply. "I understand loneliness." Brennan moved closer slowly, as if giving her time to retreat. When she remained still, he reached out to brush the stray hair from her cheek, his fingers coming away with a smudge of flour. "The town will talk regardless," he said quietly, "but I don't want you to suffer for it." What do you suggest? Something shifted in his expression, uncertainty replaced by resolution. There's one way to silence the gossip, one proper arrangement that would give you protection and respect. Eleanor's heart quickened. Brennan, marriage, he said simply. A business arrangement, if you will. You'd continue your work here, but as my wife, not my employee. No one could question your presence then. You'd have security, a home. A business arrangement, she repeated, trying to hide her disappointment at the practical nature of his proposal. At first, he added, his voice softening. Though I'd hope in time it might become more. I've grown to admire you, Eleanor, respect you. And if I'm honest, there are deeper feelings developing that I didn't expect. Eleanor looked down at her flour-covered hands, overwhelmed by his words and her own conflicted emotions. She'd come to care for him more than she'd admitted even to herself, but marriage, so soon. This isn't a decision to make lightly, she finally said. Would you allow me time to consider? Of course. He stepped back, giving her space. Take all the time you need. That night, Eleanor lay awake in her small room, weighing Brennan's proposal against her limited options. Marriage would provide security, respectability, and a permanent home. But could she commit herself to a man she'd known only a short time, regardless of her growing feelings? By morning, she still hadn't reached a decision. Brennan was characteristically reserved at breakfast, making no mention of their conversation. Instead, he announced his plans to begin breaking a new stallion that had arrived the previous week. Will you be careful? The words slipped out before Eleanor could stop them, her concern evident. His expression softened. Always am, but horses can be unpredictable, especially wild ones. Eleanor spent the morning distracted, her thoughts divided between Brennan's proposal and her worry about his work with the untamed horse. Shortly after noon, her concerns proved justified when she heard a commotion from the corral. She rushed outside to find Brennan on the ground, the chestnut stallion circling nervously nearby. Two ranch hands who occasionally helped with the horses were hurrying toward him. Brennan. Eleanor gathered her skirts and ran to where he lay, dust coating his clothes and blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Are you hurt? Just knocked the wind out of me, he grimaced, attempting to sit up. And a cut where I hit the fence post. Don't move, she ordered, examining the wound. This needs cleaning and stitching. With the ranch hands' help, they got Brennan into the house and seated at the kitchen table. Eleanor worked quickly, cleaning the wound with whiskey and preparing a needle and thread. This will hurt, she warned, positioning herself to begin stitching. Not my first injury, he said, but his sharp intake of breath when the needle pierced his skin betrayed him. Eleanor worked methodically, her hands steady despite her racing heart. You could have been killed. Hazard of the profession, he replied through gritted teeth. Been thrown hundreds of times. That doesn't make it less dangerous. She tied off the last stitch and began bandaging his head. You should rest. There's work to be done. The work will wait. Her tone brooked no argument. Doctor's orders. A faint smile touched his lips. I wasn't aware you had medical training. My mother taught me. She nursed during the war. Eleanor helped him to his feet. You'll rest on the sofa where I can keep an eye on you. To her surprise, he complied without further protest. Once he was settled, she brought him water and willow bark tea for the pain, then pulled a chair beside him. You don't have to watch over me, he said, though the warmth in his eyes contradicted his words. I believe I do. Eleanor took a deep breath, making her decision in that moment. Especially if I'm to be your wife, Brennan's eyes widened. Eleanor, yes, she said simply. I accept your proposal, though I have conditions. Name them. This will be a real marriage, not merely a business arrangement. I won't enter a union of convenience only to live as strangers under one roof. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I wouldn't want that either. And I wish to remain involved in the ranch operations, not just the household. You called me a partner when you hired me. I want to be one in truth." "Agreed," he said without hesitation. "You've already proven your value to the Rocking Inn." Eleanor studied his face, searching for any sign of reservation. "Are you certain? You propose to stop the gossip, but marriage is far more binding than employment." Brennan's expression grew serious. "The gossip may have forced the timing, but it didn't create my feelings. I wouldn't have asked if I didn't want you as my wife, Eleanor. These past weeks have shown me what my life could be with you in it." Something in his honest declaration broke through the last of her hesitation. Leaning forward, Eleanor pressed her lips gently to his, a brief but meaningful first kiss that promised more. "Then we have an agreement, Mr. Nash." His smile, despite the pain of his injury, was the most genuine she'd ever seen. "I believe we do, Miss Reed, soon to be Mrs. Nash." They were married 2 weeks later in the same church where they'd faced the town's judgment. The ceremony was small but dignified, with only a few friendly neighbors and ranch hands in attendance. Eleanor wore a new dress of deep blue cotton, with a small bunch of wildflowers Brennan had gathered that morning. The townspeople's reactions varied from shocked surprise to begrudging acceptance. Mrs. Jenkins made a point of telling anyone who would listen that she'd suspected all along there was more between them than employer and employee. Reverend Clark, to his credit, offered sincere congratulations after performing the ceremony. "Marriage is a sacred commitment," he told them. "I pray you'll build a strong foundation together." "We already have," Brennan replied, his hand steady on Eleanor's back. Their return to the Rocking Inn as husband and wife marked the beginning of a new chapter. Eleanor moved her belongings to the main bedroom, the small pantry room reverting to its original purpose. The transition was both momentous and surprisingly natural. As if they'd been building toward this union since the day Brennan found her outside the saloon. That evening, after a simple celebration dinner, they sat together on the porch swing, watching darkness settle over the land that was now truly their shared home. "Happy, Mrs. Nash?" Brennan asked, his arm around her shoulders. Eleanor leaned into his embrace. "Very. Though it still seems remarkable how quickly life can change. 6 weeks ago I was desperate and alone. Now I'm here with you with a home and purpose. And a partnership," he reminded her. "I meant what I said about you being involved in ranch operations. I'll hold you to that," she smiled. "I have ideas about expanding the vegetable garden, maybe adding chickens and dairy cows. We could sell extra produce and eggs in town." "Already planning improvements," he chuckled. "I made a good choice bringing you home that day." "As did I, accepting your offer." Eleanor turned to face him, suddenly serious. "I want you to know that while our marriage may have begun unusually, my commitment to you is genuine." Brennan's hand came up to cup her cheek, "as is mine." "I may not be the most eloquent man, Eleanor, but I'll show you every day that you're valued, respected." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "Loved." The word hung between them, new and significant. Eleanor's heart swelled with emotion as she leaned forward to kiss him, no longer hesitant but with the certainty of a woman embracing her future. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness that belied the pragmatic beginnings of their relationship. Eleanor discovered that Brennan's strength was matched by a gentle consideration that made her feel both cherished and desired. For his part, Brennan found in Eleanor a passionate nature that had been carefully concealed beneath her proper exterior. "You continue to surprise me," he whispered as they lay entwined afterward, the moonlight casting silver patterns across the bed. Eleanor smiled against his chest. I hope I always will. As autumn painted the landscape in russet and gold, the rocking inn flourished under their combined efforts. True to his word, Brennan included Eleanor in every aspect of ranch management. She proved adept not only at keeping the books, but also at implementing improvements that increased both comfort and efficiency. Her chicken coop and expanded garden were immediate successes, providing eggs and produce for their table with enough surplus to trade in town. When she suggested converting an unused shed into a dairy, Brennan not only agreed but helped her redesign the space for maximum functionality. By winter, Eleanor had gained confidence in riding and basic ranch tasks, even joining Brennan occasionally when he moved cattle between pastures. The sight of his wife capably handling her mount and following his directions filled Brennan with unmistakable pride. "You're a natural horsewoman," he told her one crisp December afternoon as they returned from checking fence lines. "Hard to believe you were riding side saddle just months ago." "I had an excellent teacher," she replied, "and motivation to learn quickly." Their trips to town gradually became less strained as Moab's residents adjusted to their marriage. Eleanor's dignified conduct and obvious contentment eventually silenced even the most persistent gossips. When she introduced her homemade preserves and extra produce at the general store, several townswomen cautiously began establishing friendships. Christmas brought their first real celebration as a couple. Eleanor decorated the ranch house with pine boughs and red berries, baked traditional cookies from her mother's recipes, and surprised Brennan with a hand-knitted scarf. "It's not much," she apologized as he unwrapped it. "It's perfect," he assured her, immediately wrapping it around his neck. "No one's made me something by hand since I was a boy." He presented her with a small wooden box. Inside lay a delicate silver bracelet set with a single turquoise stone. "Brennan, it's beautiful," Eleanor gasped, running her finger along the intricate band. "Belonged to my mother," he explained. "Only thing I have left from her. She'd want you to have it." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears at the significance of the gift. "I'll treasure it always." As they sat before the fire that night, mugs of spiced cider warming their hands, Eleanor rested her head on Brennan's shoulder. "Did you ever imagine when you found me outside that saloon that we'd be here like this?" "Can't say I did," he admitted. "Thought I was just hiring help. Didn't expect to find a wife, a partner." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "A love I wasn't looking for." The spring of 1877 brought new beginnings to the Rocking Inn. The ranch expanded with the purchase of adjacent land, made possible by Eleanor's careful management of their finances. Brennan's reputation as a horse trainer continued to grow, bringing clients from as far as Denver seeking his expertise. Most significant, however, was the news Eleanor shared with Brennan one quiet evening in April as they sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset. "I have something to tell you," she said, her hand finding his. "Something wonderful." Brennan turned to her, eyebrows raised in question. "We're going to have a child," Eleanor said, her voice soft but certain. "In November, if my calculations are correct." For a moment, Brennan sat perfectly still, processing her words. Then, with a whoop that startled the nearby chickens, he lifted Eleanor from the swing and spun her in a circle. "Careful," she laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "I may be in a delicate condition." He set her down immediately but kept his arms around her. "A baby," he whispered, awe evident in his voice. "Our baby." "Are you pleased?" she asked, though his reaction had already answered the question. "Pleased doesn't begin to cover it." His hand moved to rest gently against her still flat stomach. "Never thought I'd be a father. Never thought I deserved to be." Eleanor covered his hand with hers. "You'll be a wonderful father, Brennan, just as you've been a wonderful husband." The months of Eleanor's pregnancy saw further changes at the ranch. Brennan insisted on hiring additional help to reduce her workload, bringing on a young ranch hand named Thomas, who proved competent with both horses and cattle. Eleanor's condition did little to slow her down at first, though she grudgingly accepted more rest as summer's heat intensified. In September, they traveled to Moab to visit the new doctor who had recently set up practice. Dr. Wilson confirmed that everything appeared normal with both mother and child, but advised against any strenuous activity in the final months. "Your wife is healthy," he assured Brennan, "but first pregnancies require particular care." Eleanor found herself unexpectedly touched by Brennan's attentiveness during this time. The man who had once seemed so self-sufficient now constantly sought ways to ensure her comfort, from building a rocking chair for the porch to learning to cook basic meals when she felt unwell. One evening, as she watched him awkwardly attempt to mend a tear in one of his shirts, a task she normally handled, she couldn't suppress her laughter. "I'm perfectly capable of sewing, Brennan. I'm with child, not invalid." He looked up from his tangled thread with a sheepish grin. "Just trying to make things easier for you. I know, and I love you for it." The words, which had once seemed so difficult to express, now flowed naturally between them. "But I promise I'll tell you when I need help." As October painted the landscape in autumn colors, they prepared the ranch for winter and the baby's arrival. Brennan converted a corner of their bedroom into a nursery area, building a cradle from pine harvested on their land. Eleanor sewed tiny garments and blankets, each stitch infused with dreams for their child's future. On a cold November night, with the first snow of winter dusting the ground, Eleanor's labor began. Brennan rode through the darkness to fetch Dr. Wilson, returning just as her pains intensified. The doctor's steady presence provided reassurance through the long hours that followed. Shortly after dawn, Eleanor gave birth to a son, a robust baby with his father's dark hair and a lusty cry that announced his arrival to the world. As Dr. Wilson cleaned and wrapped the infant, Brennan knelt beside the bed, pressing his forehead to Eleanor's hand. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "For our son, for everything." "We did this together," Eleanor replied, exhausted but radiant. "Just as we've done everything since you found me that day in Moab." Dr. Wilson placed the swaddled infant in her arms. "A fine, healthy boy. What will you call him?" Eleanor looked to Brennan, who nodded for her to decide. "Benjamin," she said, smiling down at their son. "Benjamin William Nash." The middle name honored her father, a gesture of reconciliation with her past that felt right in this moment of new beginnings. As winter settled over the rocking inn, the Nash family found their rhythm. Benjamin proved to be a good-natured infant, his presence filling the ranch house with new energy and purpose. Eleanor recovered quickly from childbirth, though she accepted more help than before, recognizing that motherhood required adjustments to her independent nature. Brennan took to fatherhood with unexpected ease, often carrying Benjamin as he performed his indoor chores. Eleanor would find them in the barn during feeding time, Brennan explaining the lineage of each horse to his wide-eyed, uncomprehending son. "He's a bit young for horse breeding lessons," she remarked one afternoon, finding them thus engaged. "Never too early to learn the family business," Brennan replied with a wink. "Besides, he seems interested." "He's interested in your voice, not the horses," Eleanor laughed. "He looks at me the same way when I read him the Bible stories." The spring of 1878 brought renewal to both the land and the Nash family. As wildflowers dotted the pastures, Benjamin took his first tentative steps across the porch, lurching from his mother's hands to his father's waiting arms. His delighted giggles at this achievement left both parents misty-eyed. Hard to believe it's been nearly 2 years since I found you outside that saloon, Brennan remarked that evening as they watched Benjamin sleep. Feels like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. So much has changed, Eleanor agreed, leaning against his shoulder. Including us, for the better. She looked around at their home, at the cradle containing their sleeping son, at the comfortable room that reflected both their tastes, at the man beside her who had become the center of her world. For the best, she corrected him. Though there are still moments when I wake up surprised to find myself here with you, with Benjamin. It seems almost too perfect to be real. It's real, Brennan assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple, and it's only the beginning. As spring turned to summer, the rocking inn continued to prosper. Brennan's horse breeding program gained further recognition when one of his colts took first prize at the territorial fair in Salt Lake City. Eleanor's garden and dairy production had expanded to the point where she now supplied eggs, butter, and seasonal vegetables to 2 general stores in the region. Their success brought new opportunities and challenges. In July, a wealthy rancher from Wyoming visited to discuss purchasing several of Brennan's horses, bringing with him a proposal that would change the course of their lives once again. "I'm expanding my operation," Harrison Blackwell explained over dinner. "Looking for someone who understands quality horseflesh to manage my breeding program. Position comes with a good salary, a house of your own, and a percentage of profits." He looked directly at Brennan. "I'd like that someone to be you, Nash." Eleanor felt her heart sink as Brennan thanked the man for his interest, promising to consider the offer. Later, when they were alone, she tried to keep her voice neutral. "Will you take it?" Brennan looked surprised. "Of course not." "It's a remarkable opportunity," she pointed out, though it pained her to do so. "Better money than we make here. Money isn't everything." Brennan took her hands in his. "This is our home, Eleanor, the ranch we've built together. I won't trade that to work another man's land, no matter how good the offer." Relief flooded through her. "I would have gone with you," she said softly, "if it was what you wanted." "I know." He pulled her close. "That's one of the countless reasons I love you. But what I want, what I need, is right here. You, Benjamin, this land. Our partnership." As Benjamin's first birthday approached in November, they planned a small celebration. Several neighboring families had been invited, along with Reverend Clark and his wife from Moab. Eleanor spent days preparing special foods and decorating the house, wanting everything to be perfect for their son's milestone. The morning of the gathering dawned clear and cold. As Eleanor dressed Benjamin in the special outfit she'd sewn for the occasion, Brennan entered the bedroom holding a small package. "What's this?" she asked as he handed it to her. "Something for you, not Benjamin," he explained, "though it's because of him in a way." Curious, Eleanor unwrapped the package to find a small leather-bound book. Opening it, she discovered it was a journal, the first pages already filled with Brennan's careful handwriting. "I started recording our story," he explained, suddenly looking uncertain. "From the day I found you outside the saloon to Benjamin's birth. Thought it might be something he'd want someday to know how his family began." Eleanor traced the words on the page, touched beyond measure by the gesture. "It's beautiful, Brennan. I never knew you could write like this." He shrugged, embarrassed by her praise. "Had plenty of time to think during those long cattle drives years ago. Composed whole stories in my head to pass the hours. Never wrote them down before, though." "Well, you should continue," Eleanor encouraged him. "Not just our past, but our present too. Benjamin will treasure this someday." The celebration that afternoon was everything Eleanor had hoped for. Benjamin, though too young to understand the significance, enjoyed being the center of attention and managed his first clear word, "Papa," to everyone's delight. As their guests departed at dusk, Reverend Clark lingered to speak with them privately. "I owe you both an apology," he said earnestly. "When you first married, I had concerns about the circumstances. I wondered if such a hasty union could succeed." He smiled, looking around at the evident prosperity and happiness of their home. "I'm humbled to see how wrong I was. Your marriage has clearly been blessed." "Thank you, Reverend," Eleanor replied sincerely, "though I believe we've worked for our blessings as well as received them." "Indeed you have," he agreed, "which is why I wanted to ask if you would consider speaking to my congregation about your experiences building this ranch together. Many of our young couples struggle with the challenges of frontier life. Your story might inspire them." Brennan looked to Eleanor, who nodded her agreement. "We'd be honored," he told the Reverend, "though I think my wife would be the better speaker." "Nonsense," Eleanor countered. "We'll do it together, as partners." The years that followed brought further growth to both the Rocking Inn and the Nash family. In the spring of 1880, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Grace, a fair-haired child with her mother's determined spirit. Benjamin, now a sturdy toddler, approached his sister with solemn responsibility, declaring himself her protector from the moment he first saw her. By 1882, the Rocking Inn had nearly tripled in size from Brennan's original purchase. Their horse breeding operation was renowned throughout the territory, and they'd expanded their cattle herd significantly. The modest log house had been enlarged and improved, though Eleanor insisted on maintaining its welcoming character rather than building the grand residence their success might have justified. "This is home," she explained when Brennan suggested a completely new house. "Our children were born here. Our life together began here. I'd rather improve what we have than replace it." As always, they reached the decision together, adding rooms and amenities while preserving the heart of their first shared dwelling. Their partnership extended beyond the ranch to the wider community. Eleanor's suggestion that they host an annual gathering for area ranchers evolved into an important regional event. Each spring, families traveled to the Rocking Inn to share knowledge, trade goods, and strengthen the bonds of frontier society. Benjamin entered the local school in 1883, riding the 5 miles to Moab with neighboring children. His quick mind and natural leadership impressed his teachers, though his occasional stubbornness, which Brennan claimed came directly from Eleanor, sometimes led to conflicts with authority. "He's just like you were at that age, I imagine," Eleanor told her husband after one particularly trying parent-teacher discussion. "Worse," Brennan admitted with a rueful smile. "At least he has your intelligence to balance my hard-headedness." Sarah, meanwhile, developed into a curious, adventurous child who adored animals and seemed born to ranch life. By age 4, she was accompanying her father on short rides around the property, her fearlessness both impressing and terrifying her parents. "She needs guidance, not restriction," Brennan argued when Eleanor worried about Sarah's daring nature. "I know," Eleanor sighed. "I just wish she'd show a fraction of Benjamin's caution." Their differing approaches to parenting occasionally led to disagreements, but these were invariably resolved through the honest communication that had become the foundation of their relationship. Neither held grudges, and both remained committed to presenting a united front to their children. In the summer of 1885, nearly a decade after Brennan had found Eleanor outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, they faced their most significant challenge when a severe drought threatened the ranch's survival. Water sources dwindled, pastures withered, and the specter of financial ruin loomed despite their years of careful management. "We might have to sell part of the herd," Brennan announced one evening after calculating their dwindling resources. "Maybe some of the horses, too." Eleanor studied the accounts spread before them on the kitchen table. "Not yet," she said decisively. "I have another idea." Her proposal was bold. Dig a series of wells and irrigation channels to access the underground water she believed ran beneath their property. It would require significant investment and labor with no guarantee of success. "It's a gamble," Brennan warned. "So was hiring me," Eleanor reminded him with a small smile. "Sometimes the greatest risks yield the greatest rewards." After 3 weeks of backbreaking work involving every hand on the ranch, they struck water, a strong, clean source that could sustain their operation through the drought and beyond. The relief and celebration that followed became another chapter in the story of the Rocking Inn, another testament to what they could achieve together. As they stood beside the newly flowing well, Brennan pulled Eleanor into his arms. "You saved us," he said simply. "We saved ourselves," she corrected, "just as we always have." By the autumn of 1886, the Rocking Inn had not only recovered from the drought but emerged stronger. The irrigation system Eleanor had championed transformed previously marginal land into productive pasture, allowing further expansion of their herds. Their children continued to thrive. Benjamin, now 9, showed a natural affinity for numbers and planning that suggested he might one day manage the business aspects of the ranch. 8-year-old Sarah remained passionate about horses, displaying an intuitive understanding of their behavior that even Brennan admitted was exceptional. In November, as they prepared to celebrate Benjamin's birthday, Eleanor found Brennan in their bedroom, writing in the journal he had maintained faithfully over the years. "Adding to our story?" she asked, settling beside him on the bed. "Thinking about how it began," he replied, closing the book. 10 years ago this month, you standing outside that saloon, too proud to beg but desperate enough to try. And you riding up like some knight from a storybook, offering salvation in the form of honest work." Brennan chuckled. "Hardly a knight. Just a lonely rancher who made the best decision of his life that day." Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder, contemplating the decade they'd shared. "Did you ever imagine when you offered me that job that we'd build all this together?" "Not in my wildest dreams," he admitted. "Though I knew there was something special about you from the start, something that made me want to know you better." "I was terrified," Eleanor confessed. "Not of you specifically, but of the unknown. I had no idea if I could manage the work, if I'd be safe so far from town, if I was making another terrible mistake in a long series of them. And now," she smiled, linking her fingers with his, "now I know it was the one decision that made all the difference, the moment my life truly began." Brennan brought their joined hands to his lips. "Mine too." Outside, the sun was setting over the Rocking Inn, painting the land they'd cultivated together in gold and crimson. From the yard came the sound of Benjamin and Sarah laughing as they chased each other in some game of their own invention. The distant lowing of cattle and nickering of horses, their livelihood, their legacy created a familiar backdrop to the moment. "We should join the children," Eleanor said eventually. "Help them collect eggs for tomorrow's breakfast." Brennan nodded but didn't release her hand. "In a minute. I'm enjoying the view." Eleanor followed his gaze out the window, taking in the prosperous ranch that had seemed so modest when she first arrived. "It is beautiful." "I wasn't looking at the ranch," he said softly, his eyes now fixed on her face. A decade into their marriage, such moments still had the power to make her heart race. Eleanor turned to him, cupping his cheek with her free hand. "You're still the charmer who convinced me to ride astride all those years ago. And you're still the woman who changed everything." Brennan leaned forward to kiss her, a gesture as familiar and essential as breathing. "My partner, my heart." As twilight deepened around the rocking inn, the Nash family gathered on their porch, watching stars appear in the vast Utah sky. Benjamin and Sarah, temporarily exhausted from their play, leaned against their parents, the four of them connected in the comfortable silence of absolute belonging. From desperate beginnings outside a dusty saloon to this moment of perfect contentment, Eleanor and Brennan had forged a partnership that transcended their initial practical arrangement. They had built a ranch, a family, and a love story that would be told for generations, all because one cowboy had taken a chance on a woman begging for work and made her not just his employee, but his partner in every sense of the word.